think that it's very sexy and Lamborghinis. And Axel, you and I both know if you have your money involved in an investment of any kind, whether it's rentals or stocks, whatever it is, you have to stay engaged on what your money is doing.
Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. This is the podcast where we help you challenge your mindset and discover where you are. Let's go. Hey, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show, where we bring you great guests, and we are debating today if we brought a queen or a princess. Jennifer Salisbury is basically with us. Jennifer, welcome to the Ideal Investor Show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
Yeah. Well, and see, actually I changed so that we could say we have two doctors in the house, but you don't even have that on your thingy now. Now I'm ashamed that I put it on my name thing there for the video.
Here, I can add it. I don't know if I can do it pretty savvy, but yes, I can do it. I am Dr. Jennifer Salisbury, but I don't normally say that in everyday conversations. It doesn't come up. I'm sure it doesn't come up where you talk either.
No, I don't normally either. But I mean, on the other hand, there's respect. You worked hard for it. So, all right, cool. Well, I mean, to get started with our show today, I would like to first ask you, tell us a little bit, how did you get to where you are today? What is kind of a little bit of the origin story or the journey that you went through?
Sure. Spent 5 years in the US Navy, ended up becoming a nuclear propulsion engineer, and got out in 2003. Did a bit of soul searching, decided what I wanted to do was help business owners who had the cojones to jump into business for themselves, and I wanted to help them do that. I said, those are my peeps, and decided I wanted to go into business consulting. So I went back to school, ended up getting my doctorate in education along the way, studying retirees and their motivation to pass down what they know. Along the way, met this crazy Canadian from British Columbia who is quite the cowboy, not literally, but wants to do different things. And so he's a carpenter, he's a contractor, he's a housing provider. And so I've just aligned myself to support him and my analytical skill set. I'm a doer, he's a visionary. And so we now live in Maui, Hawaii. He came to Maui because of vacation. Many people do. And my mom was actually a programmer here on Maui on the telescopes here. And so that's how we met. And now here we are today. I've got rentals on both the US and Canadian side. And my podcast is My Life as a Landlord, talking about both US and Canadian rentals. And that's how we met. There you go.
Absolutely. Thanks for describing that. For a second there, I was thinking you mentioned he is a cowboy that needed to be contained on an island or something like that.
Ironically, on Maui, there is so much ranching here. There are lots and lots of cowboys here. There's tons of rodeos. I mean, people don't think about that on Maui. They think, oh, snorkeling and cabana boys and fruity drinks and things. But there's a lot of ranching here, which is not what people normally think when they think of Hawaii in general. Yeah.
Right. So if I'm not mistaken, I heard that Dr. Jennifer actually wrote a book. Is that right?
Oh, I've written a couple. Are they big and published, and can you get them on Amazon? No, I'm actually working on that with a consultant that you've been working on. Yeah. The working title of my book is called, I'm going to say it, Business Shit Happens. I don't think Patrick's going to let me keep that that name. But I think what we decided is it's going to be called Succeeding Beyond the Numbers. And it's basically a how-to book on, as a business owner, if you get sued, how would you even know? What would you do if you realized you were getting sued? How can you prevent it? And it's about 40 different scenarios of how-to book of entrepreneurialism is really what it is.
Very cool. And did you have any experience of small business getting sued, or did you follow other businesses who had that?
All the above. In business, if you've got money in exchange, you're not going to go too far without having all kinds of things like insurance claims, employees stealing from you. You're not going to be immune to that. And so as long as you're in business, and as a subset of that, rentals and landlording, that's not immune either. That's all business. You're going to have troubles.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a beautiful bridge to what we had kind of like planned to discuss a little bit more. And you started out with one of the things you wanted to explore and tell our audience a little more about is what these kind of sometimes awkward conversations are from a landlord. Just to be honest, Jennifer, I'm not a super big fan of that term. I really rather like you have an owner, you have management, and then you have a tenant. And there is this kind of triangular relationship in some way, shape, or form. But regardless whether we call it owner or landlord, what would you say we should be aware of when it comes to these conversations that we need to prepare for?
Absolutely. Well, and if you've got your triangle between the tenant, the owner, and the manager, then you've got three different business relationships going on. And so in any business relationship, it doesn't matter who it is, whether it's a customer in a retail store, you're going to have conversations that are hard. You're going to have people who are asking for discounts when, why would they be asking for a discount? Or maybe a tenant is misbehaving, and either the manager's got to have that conversation or the owner's got to have that conversation. My rentals are self-managed. I don't have management, but that's me, and I'm relatively small scale. Knowing that, so what should you be aware of? That you can't avoid them. You have to be able to speak these words. You have to be able to speak in facts and without inserting emotion and drama and saying, well, I feel this and you backstab me here. And no. It's we signed the lease and this is what we agreed to, and you're behaving like this, and here's how I know, and behave or find somewhere else that's more comfortable where you want to live.
How that is, and that was a little bit in the description that my little elf and right-hand woman actually gave me, is the decision, and you said yours is basically self-managed in our case with the idea wealth growers. Part of the reason that we are basically suggesting to do management through property management companies is twofold. One is most of the properties are at least as far away as yours, which I mean, from Maui to Canada is not really around the corner. So I'm impressed how you handle that. But then the other thing is also, what are you doing? Are you more or less exclusively focusing on that activity of managing your portfolio? Or are you doing other things? And a lot of our clients are either business owners or employees in like upper management roles and stuff like that. So they're really, really, really busy. And yes, they would like cash flow. Yes, they would have control over the assets, but they don't necessarily have the time and intention to manage the properties. Just to set that as the stage, when we do, or when somebody does make the decision to work with property management, what do you think in these conversations with an organization like that ensures that we get actually the performance out of them that we're hoping for?
Property management performance, there's two aspects to screening property managers from my perspective. One is screening them before you hire them, and how long have they been in property management? How long have they, how many rentals have they managed? How many evictions have they gone through? How many warning letters have they sent out? How many leases have they written? These are all hard numbers that should be relatively easy for them to gather. And if they have, a year or less of experience as an individual, I mean, if you're hiring a company, then you want your management team to have more experience. But you want to make sure that they're aware of the local housing laws and whether the state, territory, province, city, county, whatever. I mean, some counties in the US require, your rentals to be registered and your managers have to be licensed. Well, that's not true in everywhere. So they need to be keenly aware of what is the local requirements. And so going into screening property managers, they need to demonstrate that they know how to do that. Now, let's talk about after you've hired them. After you've hired them, you can even zoom out a little bit further. Obviously, the property manager is going to be the one that is answering the phone calls for the repairs, trouble calls, broken refrigerators, leaky toilets, things like that. That's what they do, and that's what their teams respond to. But as an owner, for me, looking at the net operating income year over year and going, how can I raise revenue as much as I possibly can? And maybe we need to reposition a unit. Maybe we need to renovate a unit. Maybe it doesn't make sense to renovate a unit. And sometimes you run the numbers, but you can also look at the line items of all the expenses and going, how come the maintenance costs this year was double last year? Is it time to replace the roof? Is it, why did the trash costs go up so high this year, or the internet costs, or whatever you're looking at, and really examining your net operating income, knowing that asset value is based on usually a multiple of the NOI. And so as an owner looking at that, we have a couple of key performance indicators that we use. One of them is per month, how much net do we get per unit? And
Right.
so we're looking somewhere between $200, $300 per unit per month is what we're looking at. Sometimes it goes down, sometimes it goes up. Another KPI we use is net value per square foot, which, anybody that's got a studio apartment, the biggest return is going to be on those studios. The smaller the unit, the higher the return. However, those are not always desirable. If you have a family of 4, they're not going to want a studio apartment,
Yeah, right.
right? And so that's another thing. So when you're talking about property management, I think the two aspects that is most critical is screening them ahead of time and then really monitoring your key performance indicators, such as your NOI. But you also want to look at tenant retention. The number one reason that people typically leave is because their management is not engaged. Their management is not responding. And if there's a problem, tenants don't wake up in the morning and go, you know what, I'm going to check in with my property manager just to see how they're doing. Doesn't happen.
Right.
And so if a tenant is calling, there's a reason why the tenant is calling. Let's get on it. Whatever they're calling about, work on it.
Absolutely. And I mean, would you think there is such a thing like too big as a company for property management?
Too big for property management.
Well, like, when you say, okay, I want them to be in business, I want to know their team, I want to know these KPIs, but there's obviously a difference if a company manages, let's say, 100 or 200 properties or 1,000.
I think it depends on how well the team is. And it always comes down to the people. And even for me as a self-manager, it always comes down to the people. Even if a company is really big and they have tens of thousands of units, if they have the right people and those smart people have created an infrastructure so that they can have active engagement, they can have tenant support, then it doesn't necessarily matter the size of the company. In fact, that may be a benefit because they may have a bigger team to respond faster. However, I have seen very small property management companies perform terribly because their engagement is low. And so it just depends. It completely depends on the human factor.
Yeah, based on the experience I have, and all our properties have property management, not just the ones I own, but also the ones that our clients own. And what I'm seeing is there is a healthy, golden, whatever you want to call it, ratio for the different kinds of people that property management needs in relation to the number of properties, right? And so as the owner, don't get informed that something is going on with my property until there are 3 work orders, right? And then I'm suddenly surprised that I just found out that 9 months of my 12 months of cash flow just disappeared to handle those 3 work orders. Whereas if they had more people or more care or whatever word you want to use, they would probably communicate when the first one comes in. And I hate it when somebody says, yeah, but we have it in the system, as if I, just like you mentioned this tenant, were to get up in the morning and say, let me check each of my property management online systems to see if any new work orders came in. That's why I hired them and paid them for it, right? So communication, let's get on that a little bit. I think it's not just awkward conversations, it's just the regular day-to-day. What would you say should landlords/owners expect in that aspect of communication?
It's interesting that we talk about this because sometimes we've done maintenance in different units and we'll go in and for example, I'm thinking of one specific example. We had just renovated one of the units and put in white trim. We had gone in, I think maybe 6 months later to do some annual maintenance, which is a very specific list of things that we do. And I had gone with them, not that I needed to, but I had gone with them and I look over and the white trim in one specific area was black. And I went, what happened there? And it was in the bathroom and it was like, okay. And I looked at the tenant, I said, how long has this been this way? Oh, it's been that way for a few months. And I'm like, did you realize that it's not supposed to be black? Every other trim in the entire building is white. So, even in my Navy career, I had plenty of mentors tell me, because I would, like a robot, go through the engine rooms and I would just go, okay, this temperature is this temp, and I would just blindly mark down these temperatures. One day I did something and one of my mentors came back to me and he said, look at what you are marking. He said, don't just be a monkey writing temperatures down. He's like, look at the trends. And he's like, if something is out of place, something has changed. Say something. And this is my whole philosophy with tenants going, if something has changed, whether it was something like last week we had a lawnmower throw a rock at a glass window. Now we've got to replace the window. Not a big deal, but it's changed, right? And the tenant didn't do it. So we've got to change it. But if they notice something different, like that tenant noticing that the white trim was turning black, it shouldn't have been black at all. And so, yeah, did we have a slow leak? Yep, we had a slow leak. And so it was like, okay, this is the symptom. Had they said something, hey, something has changed, especially, I always tell tenants, like, if you want to see us come running, tell us there's a water leak. That is definitely a drop everything, come running item. And, you know, had we known that, now it was a very slow leak, but on the top floor, I mean, it was the definition of the worst in a multifamily building, because you don't want slow leaks at all. And you certainly don't want them cascading down the building. So when it comes to communication, that's the trigger for me, is what has changed? Was it something out external? Was it something for the tenant? It could be something simple, like my sister just endured some kind of a tragedy. She was in a car accident or something happened in her family, and she's got to stay with me for a few months, and she has a dog. Okay, let's go there. Let's talk about this. How do we approach this? Right? And so something has changed, and that's the communication. So it's not always a trouble call for me. It's not always a trouble call, but it's getting people to recognize it. You know, not everybody was in the Navy and not everybody had a mentor. People haven't been told this,
Right,
right?
right,
It doesn't
exactly.
occur to them to say something. Yeah.
So this also goes, I think, what is following the rules and what is a mixture of common sense and intuition, I would say. And what I mean by that is, okay, following the rules would be maybe that there are some rules in certain jurisdictions that say the tenant, when they do everything, at least on external appearance, that they are supposed to do, then you have to ask them permission to get into the property, even though you own it. So that's fundamentally the rule pretty much most places. I believe there's another thing to say, okay, well, the rules are there, but we sign an agreement and we can agree to something in addition to or beyond the rules. And I want to reiterate this and point this out, because you mentioned it kind of in passing, that agreeing, or the tenant to agree by signing the lease agreement, that, you know, 2 to 3 times a year, landlord or property management can get access that cannot be denied. We used to do one thing in the spring and in the fall to exchange the air condition filters and any other filters in the house, which is a good reason, and it gives you an opportunity to take a look around and see how the property is looking. What's your thought on those kind of things, to basically take what is the fundamental foundation and then build up on that?
In all of my leases, I put in all of my leases that we do quarterly inspections of some kind, which is true. You know, we do annual maintenance, but we also do fire alarm inspections. There's all kinds of different things that we will enter and go in. And especially during COVID was sort of an anomaly, right? When we were doing the fire alarm inspections, especially, we took special precautions during COVID, and especially if someone was sick, or they thought they were sick, then they could say, no, we don't want you to enter, and that's fine. And we had one particular tenant that denied us 2 years in a row. And I said, okay, so we hadn't been in her unit at all in 2 years because of COVID. And so finally it got to the very last bit. And I said, look, you can deny us again, but here's what we're going to do. We have not been in your unit. So you tell us any day, any time, we must get in your unit. You set the time. So there's no denial here. And so we did that. And, you know, I said, you can even do it 11 o'clock at night on a Saturday night if that's convenient for you. But we are requesting to enter your unit and we have permission to do it, but you need to schedule it. So there's no denying here. So if people are actively saying, no, you can't come in, it becomes a safety issue for insurance. It becomes a safety issue for just the management in general, saying, you know what, we have permission to go in. If you're starting to deny it, fine, we'll do it at your convenience. And if you're still denying it, that again, it goes against the spirit of the agreement that you already have.
Right. And coming back to the spirit of the agreement, but also the literal aspect of the agreement, I found, especially since you mentioned the COVID time, that there was a lot of emphasis on evictions. I understand, and I mean, I didn't have to deal with it. We didn't have any evictions during that time, but
Yeah, I didn't either.
contracts were still contracts. Nobody ever said a contract isn't valid, right? And so some jurisdictions I know allow 2 or even 3-year leases. Most are actually more 1-year leases. So I want to just for our audience point out, in your scenario, at one point, obviously, you made a conscious decision to say, okay, this lease in a 2-year time period was probably up at some point within that 2 years, to weigh, do we want to keep this tenant even though we have been denied access, or are we just letting the agreement expire, give proper notice as the agreement stipulates, and then the tenant will have to leave because the agreement ends and the right to have access to this property is also thereby ending. What's your thinking about that?
Well, during COVID, there was so many different things that were dictated in different areas. The state of Hawaii, which is where we have our rentals where we are right now, they had said that you can't do this, this, and this. You can't evict people for non-payment. You can't do this. You can't do that. In British Columbia, it was you can't evict people for non-payment, but you could for mischief, right? And we did renew, but here's the thing: in British Columbia, it doesn't time out. In Hawaii, it's a 1-year lease, and then it's a hard end, and then there's a holdover. In British Columbia, it doesn't actually time out. You don't renew it. It just shifts into month to month. So it automatically. Yeah.
Most places that we have properties, both our clients and myself, it goes to month. But I mean, the point is still, you as the owner of the property have obviously the right to say, do I want this transition from a fixed term 2 months to month? And obviously, I'm sure you do the same. You have in your contract, what does it cost month to month? What does it cost per year?
Right.
What does it cost for 2 years or so forth? But my point is a little bit more in the direction, okay, we have 24 months, we have had 12 months have passed. So do we let it go to month, or are we basically just notifying that we don't want to extend, whether it's month to month or another year or whatever, right? Because it's still an agreement.
You know what? It depends. If the tenant has been paying on time every time, there's been no mischief, there's been good communication. These are all good things that a manager is going to look at when we're considering renewing or redoing a lease, letting it go month to month. But when you've got people like, for example, we had one tenant that we went in to do some annual maintenance, and there's a cat tower in there. Well, it's a no cat building. There's people, it's shared laundry, and we have cat allergies. What is this? We had to give a warning letter and say, you have 48 hours to rehouse this pet because you're in violation of the lease, and you're going to make people sick. That's the worst part, is it was an immediate health issue. That's the kind of thing where it's like, you want to look at the history of the tenancy and are they abiding by the agreement? And they're hard conversations. They're hard conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this goes back to the point about communication, right? If there is a good relationship, and I feel it doesn't necessarily matter if the relationship is between a professional property management organization and the tenants, or between the owner and the tenants. If the relationship is good and respectful, and there is an intention, for example, to have a pet, there's nothing wrong with asking, right? And then if there's a way, because not every property is necessarily a pet-free property, it is possible. I mean, I had, for example, a situation where an Air Force guy actually asked if he could lease the property with a dog. He obviously didn't disclose, which I didn't think was very nice, that he left during the day and left the dog in one room. Now, on the one hand, I appreciated that he didn't want to have the dog roam free in the whole house, but obviously the dog wasn't super happy about this and worked on the room all the time. But then on the flip side, good communication also means when he got orders to PCS to another location, he gave notice to the property management and said, okay, you can immediately assume to keep my security deposit, and if there's any other cost to fix this room, then let me know. And he had no problem, right? So that's the kind of relationship and communication that you can have. versus other people who think just because they pay you rent, they have no more obligations than make a payment once a month. So, okay, cool. Now I have talked probably more than I should have. What other things would you like to let our audience know, Jennifer?
I think that landlording and rentals, and there's a lot of work behind the scenes that a lot of people think that it's very sexy and Lamborghinis and, you know, dripping in diamonds and lavish parties in the penthouse. And Axel, you and I both know if you have your money involved in an investment of any kind, whether it's rentals or stocks or bonds or whatever it is, you have to stay engaged on what your money is doing. I think that there is this TikTok era going on right now where everybody's very flashy and making these investment things looking like it's no effort, it's high return and big money and just glam. This is hard work. Now, am I doing my rental management all the time? No, I'm not, because I've been doing this for 15 years and I understand how to empower my teams, but I also understand when the team is not functioning and I have to step in. I understand this kind of stuff. My day job is, you know, working with my husband and providing housing, and he's a licensed contractor in Hawaii, and we're doing a tiny home development in Canada. That's from my real job, is we provide housing in other ways. We're trying to fill the gap. So it's an interesting notion when people think that things are, I want to say, truly passive, complete mailbox money, and they can completely let their hands go. Sometimes it is, but it comes down to the people. But even with the mailbox money, it's still your money. You can't just completely just toss people the keys and go, yeah, take care of it and send me my Lambo.
Yeah, absolutely. And right, if you
Yeah.
say I have X amount of money and I want to do something in real estate, the real question is how much control? If you want very little control or no control, you can do some real estate related ETF, or you can get a real estate investment trust purchase for however much money you want to put in. If you want a little bit, tiny little bit more control, you can do syndication. You still don't really have say in the big way or real control, but there are at least some meetings and some decisions that the limited partners can do and will do. If you want then more than that, then you can consider, okay, what is the amount of money? And what you and I and others like us as investors do is we have full control. We can utilize things like leverage, like getting the property financed. We get 100% of the appreciation and all those kind of things, right? And that's something needs to be clear. Now, I'm assuming, since you're so passionate about landlording, that you wouldn't mind if some more people would come by and listen to you about that, right?
Oh, I wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So how do they do that? Where do they find you, Jennifer?
So on all podcast platforms, My Life as a Landlord is the show. And we talk about all kinds of stuff. And Axel, you've been on my show.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. We had such a great conversation when we did that. Yeah, so that's very cool. Now, independent of all this investing, real estate, landlording stuff, I always like to ask one or two questions at the end of the show. So the first one would be, if you could meet anybody, who would it be and why? Okay.
Alexander the Great was, 30 something, and he ended up dying, but he had no fear. He conquered all kinds of continents, quite frankly, and there's so many cities that are named after him. And then he mysteriously died. And now, of course, we have no idea where he's buried. We don't know where his treasures are. And just a real, I'm married to a cowboy in my husband, but I think Alexander the Great was the original rebel, and it worked. And people loved him for it. And so I'd love to have a conversation with Alexander the Great.
Okay, yeah, that's a really cool answer. Thank you for sharing that. And then the second question, since you gave us such a concise answer, is if you, and obviously you wouldn't go exactly to the same spot, that's not allowed anymore. But if you had a time machine, where would you go and why?
Oh, I am a huge fan of ancient technology. Technology. And so specifically for me, Egyptology, and I would love to go back to when the Great Pyramid was constructed. And I think I understand, I've spoken with Dr. Zahi Hawass about this and learned a little bit more about what his thoughts are, but I think there was an interior ramp to the Great Pyramid. But I would love to go back to the Great Pyramid when it was being constructed and answer that question.
Okay, yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
I mean, there are also people strongly believing that it wasn't done by the people like you and me at the time.
Yeah.
So.
And I think it's a very interesting one. And my response is, who are we to know? We will very likely never know. And one thing that I do know is that our smartphones are making us dumber. And when we're looking at ancient technologies, they may have had all kinds of things that we didn't understand. They may have had cutting tools and metals and all kinds of things that we will never know about, but they were certainly as innovative, if not more innovative, than we are. That's what I think.
Wonderful. Well, Jennifer, I hope we can do this again at some point, maybe after
Anytime.
the book is launched, and then we see what you got out there and maybe do it again.
I would love to. My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.